Meet the Ocean.
Nine years old. I had a blue French mask. I had a pair of Frankie the Frogman flippers that looked like lily pads. I had a snorkel whose mouthpiece must have been made of iron. I padded across the boardwalk at the Ocean Beach Club in Elberon, New Jersey, and put my head in the sea, and my life changed. 9 years old. I always suspected that there was something under that vast, endless horizon of surface. And I was right. It is most of our planet. It is probably the most impelling and gorgeous part of our planet, but then again, I'm very prejudiced.
Welcome to episode 10 of Meet the Ocean. I'm your host, Paul North, and if you can believe it, we have crossed over into double-digit territory with 10 episodes to round out our first full year of our ocean education podcast. So far, the journey has taken us from the Arctic, down into the Marianas Trench, to Alaska, the tropics, and of course, all the way down to Penguin Town, Antarctica. Why do we do this? Because we are an educational nonprofit that believes that the power of storytelling can build a bridge between scientific knowledge and public understanding. So we gather the stories of ocean experts and advocates from around the world so that more people can hear their stories and understand the richness and complexity of our planet's saltwater ecosystems. Because this is a commemorative episode, we are featuring two of my personal ocean heroes, National Geographic photographers David Doubilet and Jennifer Hayes. If their names happen to be unfamiliar to you, I can almost guarantee that you have witnessed their underwater photos, because for the last several decades, their work has appeared on the covers and in the pages of National Geographic magazine. And if that were not enough, some of David's imagery is currently on a one-way trip into space as part of a time capsule collection meant to represent our world to whatever extraterrestrials may encounter it. How cool is that? David and Jennifer have explored nearly every ocean on our planet, and it was with great fortune that I was able to dive with them for 3 weeks in the Southern Ocean aboard the National Geographic Explorer. What follows is a view into their origins, adventures, and mission to example why the ocean matters most.
It's very funny that I feel that the ocean has been running through my blood and, of course, Jennifer's blood. It's just a single piece of this world that has been so captivating. And it gives you a perspective. The ocean is 70% of our planet is covered with water. And yet we know so very little about what's beneath our flippers, what's going on at the end of our fins. In New Jersey, when I grew up, if you were lucky, you could see your feet. That's how dark and miserable the water was. But swimming around the jetty, I saw blackfish, I saw occasional flash of a striped bass. I saw the great tail of the last of the barn door skates that used to inhabit the Jersey shore. I wanted to make pictures more than anything else. I wanted to bring back something. At 9 years old, I still was very interested in photography. I was very interested in the ocean, and the things began to combine. So by the time I was 12, I built my first underwater camera, with the help of my father, who was a professor of surgery at New York University. And he brought back this rubber anesthesiologist bag. And there was instructions in a diving book called Diver Below that showed you how to make this underwater camera. You take an old mask, you take a rubber bag, we're using hot water bottles, but I had something much more flexible. Put your Brownie Hawkeye into the rubber part of the bag, seal the front of it with an old face mask with a glass in the band, and voila, you had an underwater camera. We tried to submerge it. We finally let the air out. I could manipulate the vastly difficult controls of the Brownie Hawkeye, which is wind and click. And I could take pictures, and I began to take pictures, first in the swimming pool, then offshore around the great and vast and highly dangerous jetties for a 9-year-old of New Jersey. There were pictures of blackfish and occasional pictures of skate. There was all sorts of wonderful things, and occasional pictures of my feet. Those pictures were terrible, but that's how you begin. Here I am, 12 years old, and already every waking hour that I had away from school, away from summer camp, away from anything, was swimming back and forth along the New Jersey coast. Sometimes I'd swim for 4 hours a day. We had very primitive wetsuit, dry suit things that we used. Our first wetsuit we had to make out of neoprene with scissors and glue, and it ripped. But it kept us warm, and I just swam and swam and swam and looked and swam. So that's 100 hours in that 12-year-old's mind. 100 hours out of a year. Actually more. It was 100 days times 3 hours, so it was 400. 300 or 400 hours. And after a while, those years began to accumulate. Every year I'd spend at least 100 days underwater. 12, 13, 14, I was a dive guide in the Bahamas. I filled tanks and eventually took people out, drove the boat, took them diving. I worked for the National Marine Fisheries at Sandy Hook, New Jersey. And I dove, and in the off hours I would take my camera and begin to really shoot pictures and to really think about images. What went on below was so alien to what went on above.
I too grew up exploring the Jersey Shore as a kid. Not nearly as ambitiously as David. Mostly I spent my time on my belly, either on a boogie board or contemplating the many horseshoe crabs upon the sand. But still, it was my first taste of the salt water. But water does not need to be salty to spark the imagination. Take Jennifer Hayes' childhood as an example.
When did I meet the ocean? Well, I grew up inland on a dairy farm in upstate New York, close to the inland sea. It was the Great Lakes. I lived close to Lake Ontario, and we had a cottage there. And whenever we were done on the farm, we'd go to the cottage, and I would go in the water and just stare at things under our dock. I had a mask, and I would look and peer and think. And then my father dug a pond on our farm, and I went in there and I stocked it with fish, and I caught things in our creeks, and I would watch Doc Cousteau on Sunday mornings in between chores, and I dreamed of the ocean, and my father would say that's a long way from here. And I majored in biology, and as an undergraduate, one day I saw on a wall in the science building a 4-credit course in Jamaica, Discovery Bay Coral Reef Science program, and I tore a slip off and said, I'm going. And I did. I had a lot of freshwater biology behind me, and I said, I'm going to give this a try. I've always dreamed of working in the ocean. It was 4 credits, and I went to Discovery Bay, and I fell in love, and I never left the sea after that. I was certified when I was 14 because I was obsessed with everything underwater in the freshwater systems that surrounded me, everything from streams to ponds to lakes, you name it. It's from salamanders. I read about sharks, but I had salamanders in front of me, so I would look at them. And I went to university, and I studied, and I got out, and I went to graduate school and was doing graduate research, and I had a lot of symposiums, and I would put up pie charts and graphs and numbers telling you all about the life and life history of this magnificent fish called the sturgeon. And, I had the best graphs and the most colorful and the most data-filled, and then everybody in the audience would say, what does the fish look like? It sounds wonderful. How come? Tell us more about the fish. And then a light went off, and I said, wait a minute, I need to turn this upside down. I need to show the fish doing what the fish does. What does a sturgeon do? What does a sturgeon look like? What incredible things can I share with these scientists? So the next year when I went back to the sets of global symposiums, I took videos and images of sturgeons doing sturgeon things and roaring ovations and, oh my God, I've never seen a sturgeon look like that, and spawning and doing and egg laying. And then I spoke the data and showed the sturgeon images, but just literally spoke about the data. And I realized I motivated more people, funding poured in because it raised the enthusiasm. And I began to realize that, wow, there's power in pictures. There's power in image making. They tell a story. Actually, the fish tells its own story, but it just became more powerful than ones and zeros and pie graphs and charts. So I stayed underwater and began making photographs of the creatures.
So now we know where David and Jennifer began. And given their photographic resume, we know they have been to many of Earth's saltwater treasure troves. But even knowing this, there are still locations that strike them with awe. Because no matter how many times you might visit them, they continue to astound, simply because of the raw abundance of their nature.
We love coming to the Southern Ocean. We love coming to the Antarctic Peninsula. And South Georgia, when you leave the Antarctic Peninsula, you think it can't get any better than that. You're with penguin colonies, you see crab-eater seals and Weddell seals and leopard seals and ice sculptures that look like water gardens, frozen water gardens. And then you leave and you're sad. And then you come into South Georgia thinking, is this even possible, or am I in a dream? South Georgia is, for me, one of the most magnificent pulses of life on the planet. It's indescribable. I don't even really have words.
South Georgia's on our mind. I think that's the best way to tell you. Jennifer talked about a pulse of life. To look at 160,000 pairs of penguins, king penguins stretching across a plain of beach, across a plain of marshy water, and up into the side of a mountain. All powered by this incredible, small, little shrimp-like creature called a krill.
Krill. It's what's for dinner in the Southern Ocean. Seriously, you have to work pretty hard to find a creature that isn't connected to these little crustaceans in some way. Don't use your fingers to count, because you'll very quickly run out. Humpback whales, fins, and blues, every species of penguin, and octopus too. Even seals have adapted their teeth to not need to chew. They just take in a mouthful of krill, keep the protein in, and let the water pass through. At 6 centimeters and weighing 2 grams, they can live up to 6 years. For something so small, that's quite a lifespan. And when you think of our planet and all the life that it can sustain, know that krill have the largest concentrated biomass on Earth, numbers that stretch into trillions. Let that hit your brain. But what do they eat before they are eaten? Turns out that they are farmers that gobble up phytoplankton, small single-celled algae that harvest the sun's energy. And to feed all those krill, of diatoms there must be plenty. Poetry aside, krill are the heartbeat of the Southern Ocean. And if you don't already know, they are being actively fished commercially in Antarctica. Some are used in dietary supplements for omega-3, but the majority goes to fish farms around the world. No matter the regulations that the fisheries might have, the fact remains that we are taking food away from the whales, penguins, and seals. We have to be careful. Removing such an important food source can have great consequences on Antarctic biodiversity. And, let's be real, stealing from penguins just isn't cool. I'm Charlotte Fisher, and this has been Meet the Ocean Creature Feature.
diving in the Southern Ocean is not easy. It's the coldest and saltiest ocean on our planet. No matter how many layers you put on, you still feel the cold. And depending on the day or the dive location, you might not even be able to see your hand in front of your face. Sounds like fun, huh? But that doesn't mean it isn't worth it. So I asked David and Jennifer a question that often comes my way. Why do you do it?
Why do we like the polar regions? We work as a team at Nat Geo. We're together 24/7, above and below the water. We co-produce the stories. And we found ourselves spending a lot of time on coral reef systems and love it. It's especially embedded in the Coral Triangle. It's a magic place. And so Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Belize in the Caribbean, and all these warm water places that are magnificent. And in 2010, an opportunity came up to join a collaborative effort in Antarctica called Elysium. And it was a magic opportunity because it was our colleagues and ourselves coming together to produce a film and to produce an exhibition and to produce a book. And we had writers, filmmakers, photographers, poets, artists. Everybody lent their skill and talent to the ship and went down to Antarctica. And for David and I, it was our first trip into the ice. And we were overcome with emotion in 2010 with it. And I think we decided right then and there when we rolled in and took a look at an iceberg underneath and saw the majesty of this, and it's a metaphor for the sea, literally 80 to 90% below the surface, that out of sight to the human eye is a perfect metaphor for the sea. And we realized that and said we have to come back.
Jennifer's right. The ice below is sculptural, freeform, and magnificent. And it's the last expression of the most valuable commodity for life on Earth, which is fresh water. And as the glaciers begin to melt, more and more icebergs are calved off. We're looking at basically a representative, an indicator of how our climate's changing. To shoot these things half and half, in other words, half out of the water and half in the water, is a magnificent challenge. It's also a lot of fun. And you shoot and you realize what you're shooting is just basically it's the sculpture of our planet. Freeform and extraordinary. It's cold, it's magnificent, and it's completely fulfilling. As a photographer, it's one of the grandest things I've ever photographed. And as a team, it's one of the grandest things we've ever seen.
I have been diving Antarctica for 3 years now. And every time I'm underwater and I look up to see the bob of some brash ice or a bergy bit above me, some strange form broken off from the glacier that formed it. It reminds me that this is the stuff that has shaped our world. A simple equation of frozen water, gravity, and time. To share the Southern Ocean with David and Jennifer was, admittedly, a treat. They show a lot of class and patience to answer the hundreds of questions that they get asked during a day. And never forget to keep it silly, even to the point where David would ask me, "Where are we diving today, Uncle Paul?" But you have to wonder, how does one even approach becoming a National Geographic photographer? After so much success and exploration with the magazine, I had to ask what David's first assignment was.
The first successful story I had was a story that I wasn't assigned to. It was a story on garden eels. Garden eels are an eel that lives in the sand. Tiny little things. They're about as round as your thumb, about as long as a meter. When you approach them across the clear bottom, across fields of sand, you see them waving in the distance, back and forth, feeding on plankton. And as you approach them, they disappear. They're called garden eels because The great scientist William Beebe, trudging across the bottom of the Sea of Cortez, saw these things ahead of him and saw how they disappeared, and he looked through the kind of leaded glass, Tudor-like windows of a helmet, blinked his eyes and said, and wrote later on, "I dreamt I saw a garden of eels." Garden eels. This was a research grant piece of work, and the head of this research grant was Dr. Eugenia Clark. Dr. Clark, the shark lady, and the garden eel lady. So I was invited to the Red Sea. And I'd been in the Red Sea before on other assignments, so I knew a little bit about what I wanted. And I went to a company called Photogrammetry, which was building the really brand new underwater housings that really made a difference in making pictures. Housings called an ocean eye. And they built a special one for me with a long, 40-foot long cord and an underwater push button that I could take remote pictures. We got to the Red Sea. We set up the camera in the middle of the garden eel colony, ran the wire under the sand all the way back to a blind that had been built, and waited. And one morning, when there was a little bit of wind and the sun was rising over the Gulf of Aqaba, I went in the water, and here were the garden eels completely surrounding my camera, used to my camera. And I looked out of the blind, and I pushed the button, and I made a picture that started my career. Wide-angle image of garden eels feeding back and forth. Tiny little heads, large eyes, gulping tiny bits of plankton.
Anytime you get in the water is an opportunity to learn. It might be something new about yourself, the creatures you encounter, or even the environment that you are in. As humans, I think we seek experiences because they teach us. And something that I learned about David, Jennifer, and myself is that we all had the capacity to laugh out loud and smile until it hurt when surrounded by a small army of juvenile Antarctic fur seals in a place known as Puppy Creek.
The eyes have it. Big, magnificent, funny liquid eyes that look up at you, look around. Brand new animals to this planet. Completely at home, underwater. They fly, they loop, they turn, they basically turn themselves double underwater. And they're curious, and they come paddling and splashing at us, looking in the camera, trying to see the reflection, kind of biting the front piece of the dome. And it's all over a little berm of sand. Especially, it's like diving. This place, Puppy Creek, is like diving in a swimming pool of baby fur seals.
Wow. Well, we had heard tell a tale so great. There was a rumor that there was the happiest place on the planet. We thought it was a dream, that perhaps we couldn't actually find this happiest place on planet. And the name of this happiest place is Puppy Creek. It does in fact exist. We did in fact find it and entered the water into, it was a dream. It's a living dream filled with fur seal pups, training and splashing and playing. And they are the most curious, clever, beautiful creatures on the planet. They come and they swarm you. It's like it's a fur seal mob. It's a puppy mob. And they're, who are you? What are you doing here? Can you play? Can you play? Can you play? Can you play? And can you swim with me? No, swim with me. No, swim with me. And can I sit on your knee? And then they come back and they look at you, and it's a piece of magic. And what lurks around the corner for these guys is winter. Winter is coming, and they have to learn how to swim and how to fend for themselves. And then there's a little pool behind a berm that leads to the ocean, and so they're protected. And when we came by and stood in the water, and they had to know who we were, and it was one of the most magic moments that we've had in the Southern Ocean. So when we pulled away from Puppy Creek, we were all kind of quiet and giggly and happy and amazed and cold, but the cold didn't count. When we got back on the ship, it was one of the first time I've ever run to the cabin and put the card in to see if we had captured it, because we only had a few short minutes there. We had less than a half an hour. for this most amazing piece of life on the planet with these pups. And I wanted to see if we got it. And if we had the essence of it, the feel of it, the joy and the magic of it. And we did. We got it when we looked at it. So now we'll have that and we can share it with other people. It's just crazy pants. Puppy Creek is crazy pants.
Obviously, we had our fun, and a lot of it. But now, I think it's time to approach a more serious topic. Because David Doubilet and Jennifer Hayes are not in the water to just take pictures. They are there to tell a story. And the story of our ocean is changing in a way that many of us, including our leaders and politicians, do not want to admit. Rising sea levels, ocean acidification, dead zones, and overfishing are just some of the problems that we face. It will take a great effort to right these wrongs, and change never comes easy. But before change can even begin to arrive, we need to recognize the problem. So I asked two of the best in the business to lend their perspective on these issues.
There's a lot of front lines in climate change. Some of these front lines are entirely visible. The shrinking glaciers, the loss of ice in the north, polar bears with empty stomachs. But the other front line is the coral reefs. Think of a coral reef as a city in the sea. And the apartments and the dwellings and the skyscrapers are all made from the excretions of a tiny little being that's called a coral polyp, small as an infant's fingernail. And what it does is it produces a little house of calcium carbonate and then dies, and the next coral polyp will do the same thing. And billions and trillions and billions and trillions of coral polyps will build these magnificent structures. What happens with global climate change is because there is so much carbon dioxide put into our oceans that the very chemistry of the ocean is changing, which means that these little tiny creatures, this little coral polyp, can't build its calcium carbonate house. The ocean is too acidic. And the reefs that we look at now will be radically changing in 30 years, and by the time the next century comes around, reefs as we know it will be gone. This is what climate change does. It's important, though, for us to demonstrate this place, this reef in Time, a book by famous reef biologist Charlie Varon has put it. So we are in the process of documenting this time and place that will be gone.
It's chemistry. The global ocean chemistry is changing, and we can see it. You can actually physically see it on some coral reefs, and you see it in creatures with thinning shells, and scientists are measuring this, and they're looking at time lapse and erosion of cells, and it's terrifying. This is that these entire groups of creatures that depend on calcium carbonate, we're in trouble. I also look at global climate change in another way. Sea level rise scares me. When we see these giant melts, and we see Greenland melting at such a rapid pace, and we talk about sea level rise and losing entire nations, ocean nations in the South Pacific who are at risk. And I bring it all down to a simple perspective for me. And my perspective is a tiny island that's used by sea turtles to lay their eggs, and they return there year after year after year after year for centuries. But it's a low-lying island. And then one day they're going to return, and that island is going to be underwater because of sea level rise. And these ancient mariners, these beautiful species of marine sea turtles, will arrive with no place to lay their eggs. And for me, that's one way of looking at global climate change. And another way that's rather near and dear to us is we work with harp seals on the Canadian sea ice almost every year. And we're seeing the sea ice weaken. The females come up and they'll have their pups on the ice, and the females think the ice is what it was 50 to 100 years ago, or even 20 years ago. But it's not. It's thin and weak ice. And they'll pup their pups. They'll nurse them for 12 days. Then they abandon the pups and they go off to mate and migrate. And the pup has to be on the ice to basically learn how to fend for itself. And that sea ice is so thin that it breaks up before the pup is ready to survive. So these are other signatures of climate change that we see in our face, and we're confronted by it literally as we roll off the boat. We see this, feel it, and it becomes a bit of emotional, it's emotional baggage we carry with us, and we want to share that with the world and say, look what's happening, do what you can personally to make changes that will make a difference. So we go out and we make those pictures, we come back and we tell them about the life of the harp seals and the pups struggling to stay on stable ice and looking for stable ice, and say, this is what's happening in our world.
No shortage of perspective there. Certainly, the ocean remains something to enjoy, and by all means, we encourage you to do so. Take the family to the beach. Linger a little while longer until the last of the sun's rays fade in the sky. But while you're doing it, give a thought to how your actions might benefit or harm the beautiful creatures living in it. Wrapping up our time in the Southern Ocean, I had to ask David and Jennifer where they were off to next. And the list was impressive. Because when you're as eager to get in the water as these two are, there is always someplace else to go. Bermuda with humpback whales and the Sargasso Sea, then on to the Philippines and all the richness that the Coral Triangle provides. And given that 90% of my dive career has been in cold water, I have to admit I was a little jealous. But I can't wait to check in with National Geographic to see what David and Jennifer come up with. And before signing off, I wanted to give them carte blanche to say whatever they thought might be meaningful for our Meet the Ocean audience to hear.
Simply this: pictures have power. They have the power to illuminate. They have the power to humiliate. They have the power to celebrate. They have the power to convince the unconvinced. And these pictures have the power to open people's eyes to the sea. And that's what Jennifer and I hope that we are doing in this lifetime look, photographically and emotionally, physically, at this most precious part of our planet, this engine of the earth, the sea.
Yes, I would love to share something. We've had the extraordinary opportunity while we've been in the Southern Ocean aboard the NG Explorer to dive with Paul North. It's been, oh my gosh moment. It's we've been in ice, we've been in kelp forest, we've swam next to shipwrecks, we went to Puppy Creek, and I can't wait to come back and to go underwater in the Southern Ocean or other places, maybe the Arctic, with Paul North. It was incredible to meet you, Paul, here in such an amazing, yikes place. Amazing.
Meet Paul North. Meet the oceans. Come on, Paul, let's get to work.
And there it is. Two of the best ocean storytellers lending their voice for our 10th episode. Make sure to keep tabs on David and Jennifer as they continue to share their work, because honestly, they have yet to release an image that doesn't educate about our blue planet while tending to blow your mind. Meet the Ocean has many more episodes to come. Please keep in mind, we are a listener-supported podcast and a 501c3 nonprofit, so all donations are tax-deductible. You can check out meettheocean.org To learn more about us, see our online store, view our many photos and videos, and learn how to contribute to ocean education. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Hello, this is Caitlin Webster, artist and diver with Meet the Ocean. This episode was produced by Paul North with sound design and editing by Andrew Gettings and additional sound design by Kelsey Anderson. Meet the Ocean would like to thank David Doubilet and Jennifer Hayes for their contributions and Charlotte Fisher for providing her in-depth creature feature. We are a listener-supported 501c3 nonprofit with all donations going to further our educational outreach. Find out more ways to contribute at meettheocean.org.
Let's go on the water!
Woo! Bloop, 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 bloop.